it's after 7, so we have to. I don't think we've ever been kicked out before the alarms went off. But no, maybe the alarms are fake news. I don't know for sure. I'm going to introduce Patsy, and then I think she's going to introduce me.
That's right, Carney.
Can you do it all?
I think so. I'll try. I said to Carney, I want you to give me a bio so I can introduce you at the meeting, so people will know who Carney Reinvolt is. And he said, oh no, he says, I can introduce myself. I said, no, you're not going to introduce yourself. I want you to write up your bio so I can read it to these people. So anyway, here goes. Carney grew up in a small town, Dundee, in the Finger Lakes area of western New York State. Also, the hometown of Barbara Sweet. Carney ran in the 1968 Olympic marathon trials for the Games in Mexico City. The trials were held on Belle Isle in the Detroit River, and he placed 17 out of the top 34 nationwide runners. Carney's occupation for his entire adult life has been in land surveying, cartography, and construction. He received his New York State land surveying license in 1975, and at one time had 25 employees in 5 small offices in upstate New York, Norwich, which was their headquarters, Utica, Syracuse, Saratoga Springs, and Kingston. His signature and seal are affixed to over 3,000 maps in 29 upstate county clerks' offices. He met his wife, Tatiana, in Moscow, Russia, in 1990 while they were working together on a Moscow street map in English for the United States, British, Canadian, and Australian embassies. He so strongly fell in love with Tatiana that he proposed marriage after only 3 days. Was there a full moon or something?
That was 27 years ago.
Their son, Peter Vermeer Reinvolt, was born in the year 2000. Shortly after meeting Tatiana, he was given permission by the Soviet Union to bring 10 poor Russian children from the tiny village of Kupanskoye to visit America on a 1990 goodwill tour for a month. Nadia's Children Chorus, along with 10 adult Russian chaperones, sang in 40 churches, schools, service clubs, and even on the steps of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. All while the Cold War, was still a reality. Carney was one of the few Americans who were able to fly into Moscow, Soviet Union, during the coup of August 19th through the 21st in 1991. He and Tatiana were eyewitnesses to this historical event. Carney was appointed Hyde Park Town Historian from 2008 to 2012 and authored 4 books about Hyde Park, the Hudson River Valley, and the Roosevelts. For each book, he gave an audio-visual presentation at the Wallace Center here in Hyde Park. It was also by his initiative and responsibility for bringing the crew of the USS Roosevelt DDG-80, that's a missile launching ship out of Florida, where we send the cookies, by the way. He brought the crew to Hyde Park for the Memorial Day Parade in 2012. In 2013 through 15, he worked on heavy construction and complex surveying projects in New York City. Survey projects included the High Bridge Walkway over the Harlem River, the George Washington Bridge approaches, the Cross Bronx Expressway, Far Rockaway flood protection, the Holland Tunnel, the Coney Island Railroad Yard, the Lincoln Tunnel, and the 2nd Avenue subway. Please welcome our member and friend and my neighbor, Carney Reinvold. And I guarantee he would have never told you all that.
Thank you, Patsy. It's awfully good to see Patsy at these meetings. This is the second one she made after missing 4, but before that she spent 20 years without an absence. I'm glad she said that about Tatiana. I put it in there, but I'm glad she mentioned it. 27 years ago, I just had a life-changing experience. I really fell in love with Tatiana after about 3 seconds, but it took me 3 days to propose. My program tonight, I was going to have slides, and as usual, almost every speaker we've ever had, we've had trouble with the electronics. And we think we narrowed it down to our laptop computer that runs the slide projector. And I'm going to propose to the board of directors that we spend $500 on a new laptop. And Herb Sweet, who's, I guess he's filming me. He's not filming the slides, but he suggested that there is somebody that repairs a laptop, so we're going to try to do something with the old one. Excuse my cough. Well, our program tonight is about the 240th Military Police Battalion. They were in Hyde Park, 306 of them, during World War II, protecting the president. And of course, you know the president died while he was in Cold Springs, Georgia. Warm Spring. I said Cold Springs. Well, the 240th was here, I think, only about 2 weeks after the president passed away. They left around the 1st of May, I believe. But Mike Chwardy, over here by the table, he's a member of the 240th Military Police Battalion reenactors. And he's wearing a uniform that the 240th would have had, and I'm sure that he would be willing to answer when it gets to the question and answer portion of this program. I'm hoping that he'll help me out a little. He has on display on this table that after the presentation, you can, during the refreshments, you're willing to walk around and look at some of the articles, photographs. We have some Life magazines from the 1940s during the war. That was donated to me, and then I donated it to the 240th by Liz Quest. She lives over in Park Place. And some of my books are here. And in the center of the book, we have a lot of photographs of the 240th when they were here. Those were donated to me, and I got them into the book by a woman named Judy Harsh. And her father was a military policeman, and he was the editor for the weekly newspaper that they had. We have all those newspapers and a lot of stuff that the Historical Society actually paid. We won a bid on eBay, and we have a whole display case of the 240th here in Hyde Park. This Nazi helmet was a souvenir that George Briggs, I know some of you knew George Briggs, just the kindest, sweetest guy you'd ever want to meet. He's passed away, but he was in the Navy operating one of those landing crafts that brought the people into Normandy. I don't know if he got it on the beach at Normandy, but he brought it back, and John Golden, his real good buddy, he gave it to John Golden, and then John Golden donated it to the Historical Society, and that's also in the museum here. So, Mike, you're willing to help me out a little on the question and answers, all right? I really apologize about the slides. I only had about 8 or 9. Some people come in with 40 slides, I think. But maybe sometime I can show them 5 years from now. But the 240th was a very interesting outfit. They were usually men in their 30s, late 20s or 30s. They had to be more mature because their job was protecting the president. And we all know that FDR was the leader of the free world. And it's just something that was real important. So they quizzed these guys on their abilities to do certain tasks and everything. But they did forget to ask them what their political loyalties were. And there were a few out of the 306, maybe half a dozen, that didn't like FDR at all. One of them, Mike, do you know the name of that? One of them wrote a diary. It was the title of the diary, Diary of an Ornament at Hyde Park. And he considered himself an ornament. And he actually got kicked out of Hyde Park because he was guard duty one cold night, and he decided to fire off 5 shots. And he fired them in the air. He said he was shooting at the Morning Star, but so when the officer on duty quizzed him about it, and he said he was trying to commit suicide over a girl. But 5 shots. Yeah, it was kind of tough, right? There's a lot of interesting stories. The 240th would have a reunion after the World War II. Eleanor Roosevelt would have them out at Valkill. And every year they would all come, and of course the numbers of coming kept dropping and dropping. Maybe just the people in New York State would show up. But she had a nice reunion for them every year. And I just wished I have some slides. They had some recreation. They had a baseball team, a basketball team. And baseball was played at the Crumwald Field on Route 9, corner of Fuller Lane and Route 9. roughly where the Roundout Bank is now. And they did pretty good. They even had an exhibition game with the Philadelphia Athletics, not the Philadelphia Phillies, the Philadelphia Athletics. And they lost 6-1, but if you think of just a group of guys getting together playing a professional baseball team, that was a pretty good score.
There was a gentleman on that baseball team with 2 points that said that the umpires were for the Athletics and they didn't get any calls, balls and strikes. So they weren't happy with that at all.
Well, that sounds like an excuse, but what the heck. And a lot of people were critical of the 240th because it seemed like pretty soft duty. Their barracks were heated, and when you compared that to the men that were in a foxhole in Europe or on some island, isolated island in the Pacific, but they had guard duty year-round, and if their guard shack happened to be down by the river, they really suffered there. They had to keep marching, march, to keep the frostbite from their toes. So there were times when it was tough.
Carney, to expand on that, in the research of the 240th, many of the men were very disappointed that they were brought here to Hyde Park. They felt that they were not doing their duty as the men were doing overseas. And you see many accounts of the men writing to their senators and their congressmen in their home states to go off and serve with the men because they felt that they were doing a disservice to themselves as men and to the United States. But Roosevelt actually came out a couple of times to speak to them, which actually brightened their spirits as well. And so they understood what they were truly doing here. When Carney talked about being selective, you had to be 6'2" or taller. So I'm already historically inaccurate to portray the captain of the 240th Military Police. Many were lawyers and doctors. There were also 2 communists that were found out in the 240th that were immediately sent out of the 240th. And it comes to, there was extensive background checks for the 240th, but that was for everybody here in Hyde Park. Your family could be in Hyde Park for 200 years, but the entire village of Hyde Park was background checked once Pearl Harbor was bombed. So it was very, very extensive.
There was also a scare during the war. The Secret Service was very careful that, or worried that there would be a parachute drop, thinking that the Nazis would drop parachutists or even bomb the place. But what the planners didn't realize is that the Germans had not invested in any aircraft carriers, so they would have had a very, very difficult time getting a plane over. Towards the end of the war, they did have jets, but they didn't have enough fuel at the end of the war. So there was one scare, though. Some people up in Rhinebeck thought that there were some parachutists coming down out of the sky, a red plane, and they figured the person was maneuvering the cords to avoid the woods, but they shut down the Holland Tunnel and the Lincoln Tunnel in New York, and they mobilized all of the state police in New Jersey and New York and I think Connecticut, and they never found anybody. But they did have a plan for Roosevelt. If he was in Hyde Park at the time parachutist dropped, they had and I think they took this chute with him wherever he went, like on the train. He traveled by train most of the time. They would drop a chute like out of an airplane emergency exit, and they'd slide Roosevelt down this chute, and there was a slit trench outside, and they would get Roosevelt down into the slit trench, just like World War I. They built a slit trench for him. And I guess, I don't know if they ever practiced it or if they ever tossed him out the window or what, but I did read about that. So I went out looking for the slit trench. And there is kind of a natural slit trench where there's a stream at the southeast corner of Springwood. And you could just picture that that's where the slit trench was, because it was right outside of Roosevelt's window. His bedroom was on the south side of the house.
If I'm not mistaken, we have that shoot in our collections, don't we? We actually do. We have it in the Radville shoot in our collections there.
Yeah.
The actual shoot that they used.
You're Shannon, right? Yes. This is our new town historian. If you'll stand up and she has a tremendous research ability. I really give her a lot of credit, and she's a good writer. She writes a blog. I don't know how many of my generation reads blogs, but is very happy to team up with you on a lot of things. I got I got an email from the Arcadia publishers, and they wanted me to do a book like Margaret Marquez did 22 years ago with a sepia cover on it about the Gilded Age in Hyde Park. I suggested that we do the Statsburg Mills Mansion, the Vanderbilt Mansion, and the FDR Mansion. And they want me to do that, and I definitely will be speaking with you, Shannon, about maybe a little help, I don't know. But writing books is fun for the author until it gets to the point where you're trying to sell the book. And everyone thinks they're going to make a retirement money off selling books, and you just can't do it. I sold over 400 or 500 of those home front books, and I think it about paid for the printing cost. I might have made a couple $100 on it, but it's fun if you're like research. To write a lot, you have to read a lot, and so.
Why don't you change your name to Stormy?
To Stormy? Well, for me, that's another generation. Okay, I'm trying to tell you more about the 240th. We have that display in the museum, and we've had some sons or daughters of the MPs come. I don't think that any are still alive. It was 60 or 70 years ago now. 60, yeah, 70 years ago now. So, and they were in their 30s, so they'd have to be in their hundreds to be still kicking around. And it was just a nice piece of history that Hyde Park had. And I think we're preserving it along with Mike and his reenactors. So Mike, do you mind telling us a little of your plans? I heard something about a diorama or something at one time.
Diorama? That I'm aware of. That's news to me. Well, I didn't start the 240th military reenactors. A gentleman that no longer works for the National Park Service did. It was his lifelong interest in doing that. When he left the Park Service, I took it over 3.5 years ago. Carney's right, there are no military policemen still alive that we have known in our research. I am communicating with 5 different daughters through email. Some of the pictures that are over there are from those women that have their father's pictures. But what we try to do in the National Park Service here with the 240th is we have 5 different programs, but the big one is in August. 1943, 1944, the men trying to bond with the village of Hyde Park decided to have what's called an organizational day. It's a family fun day. And they had the local people here in the village of Hyde Park come in, have a picnic with them, hamburgers and hot dogs on the grill. They had baseball games, softball games, tug of war, egg races, sack races, three-legged races. We started that. We did that for the first time last year at the anniversary. This year it's last year was the 75th anniversary of that. We're at the 76th anniversary this year. But what we really do is go to schools and try to teach the kids what it meant about the 240, but more importantly, tell the home front of the village of Hyde Park. Many of the men that served in the 240th took wives here in Hyde Park, settled in Hyde Park, and lived here for generations. So they enjoyed the village of Hyde Park. And yes, they also had some fun here as well in Hyde Park. And my favorite story, and Roosevelt knew how to play the Secret Service and the 240th between each other. Because it is the Secret Service that in 1942 asked for help from the Army. They realized that they could not guard the 1,600 acres of the Roosevelt property and a mile radius of that property as well. So Congress created two military police battalions, 250th Military Police, which guarded the White House and then the 240th here. And the Secret Service actually answered to the 240th here, which I'm sure did not go over well. Certainly know that Mike Riley, who was the head of the Secret Service detail here in Hyde Park, was not pleased that went on. But Roosevelt learned to play with them because Roosevelt did not like all this protection. He wanted to be private. And so when he would go for a drive, the Secret Service had to follow him. That was not the 240th's job. So the 240th would be at the end of the road, and he would tell the two men there, goes, when the Secret Service asks you where I went, you tell them I went north, and I'm going south. And so for a few times it worked, and the Secret Service got upset. So Roosevelt goes, okay, I think they've caught on. So you then tell them where I'm really going, that I'm going north, and they're going to think you're lying to me, and they're going to go south. And that worked for a couple of times as well. And after a while, they decided that state troopers will man the front gate instead of the 240th Military Police. But clearly they enjoyed themselves, but it was serious as well. Their job was to shoot first and ask questions later. They didn't ask for ID. They knew who was supposed to be on the property at any given time. And if you were not expected, well, you're not expected anywhere else because you were done. There was, as far as I know, one attempt to get here, which is different than the other attempt that I've heard. What we do know is the Germans were planning U-boats up and down the river. That's what they wanted to do. But the 240th worked with the Civil Air Defense here in Dutchess County as well. So when there was an alert, planes could be in the air within 2 minutes at the urging of the 240th and the Secret Service. Now when Roosevelt dies in 1945, the last detail here of the 240th is the first week of May. We have pictures of them guarding the gravesite as well. And then the 240th were sent out to California to start training for the Pacific. Well, by the time they were ready to go, the war had ended. And so no 240th member ever served active duty outside of working here in Hyde Park. And for many in their writings, you can see the disappointment still today in those writings from 50, 60 years ago. But they had a big job. Again, you had to be smart. They were detail tests. You had to be tall, lawyer, doctors, picked all over the country. It was serious. FDR would also have Christmas parties in the library for the 240th. Eleanor would do the same thing as well. They would interact, and they had a good time.
This hot dog picnic, is it going to be Memorial Day when they have the World War II?
No, we're not doing anything for the hot dog picnic this year that I'm aware of. We'll probably do something up at Top Cottage. But the 240th, where we're going to be this year is Memorial Day weekend. Memorial Day weekend, we actually set up a tent. We set up a tent fly that shows you what we might be doing in the field. I got some of those pictures over there as well. We have a couple of typewriters that were donated to us from the 1930s because that's all the men had. That's how much the military had. the military was short on typewriters, so the Army asked for people to donate their typewriters. And, of course, the people of America responded with that. So we have 2 1930s typewriters, and we have 2 field telephones that we hook up and put around the property as well. So that's Memorial Day weekend. This year I think it's the 26th and 27th of Memorial Day, Saturday and Sunday. Family Fun Day, also at the library, June 30th. We're going to also set up another 10 fly. Then in the fall, I haven't set the date yet. It's either August or September. I'm going to conduct a hike going from the Roosevelt home all the way up to Top Cottage to give people the sense of what we were doing. We are walking the property all the time. We're the men of the 240th Military Police. And then in August is our big thing where we recreate that organizational day. We will have food there and snacks, and I encourage everybody to come. Bring your glove. We'll put you in the baseball field as well. And then in November, we end with our Veterans commemoration, and that's in the Visitor Center of the FDR home, and we recreate World War I, World War II, and the 240th Military Police. I'm constantly reaching out to folks that have anything with the 240th. I think it's an important story. It's a story that allows me to tell you the story of the home front. It's not just about the 240th. It's about what Hyde Park went through during the war. People forget that the wars in Europe and the Pacific didn't affect the United States. It certainly did affect the people here. There was gas rations. One point in Hyde Park, the 240th, one gentleman told this story that gas is so short that you could not be driving your car if it wasn't a specific day. Well, this sheriff told the 240th member that this one day you had to have an excuse, and that excuse was you had to be going to visit a friend in the hospital. Well, he arrested over 100 different people who had friends in the hospital that day. It was quite amazing that he said he made some money for Hyde Park. And, of course, there's a rubber shortage that you could not continue to drive as well for that. There was rations and coffee as well. And that's what the 240th is really all about, is to teach about the home front here in Hyde Park, that the country was hurting just as much as the soldiers were overseas.
I have a question.
Yes.
You didn't tell the people.
Yeah.
You didn't tell us where they were housed while they were here.
Well, originally, Roosevelt was going to have them housed in 10 homes on the property, and he realized, well, that was going to look quite bad on his own property. And so they are stationed at the Rogers property, somewhere at the Carriage House, at the Vanderbilt property as well. And that's where the organizational day was held. And then they served down at Hyde Park, but those were the 2 spots that they were housed, the Carriage House at Vanderbilt and the Rogers Estate. I got some pictures of them doing field exercises out in the middle of the Rogers Estate as well. Any other questions?
I have another question.
Well, let me get the...
Were there always 300? I think you could hear me. Were there always 300 on site?
For the most part, there's always 306. If somebody left, it took a couple weeks to get somebody. There was a training unit for men, just in case people left. The lowest I ever saw was at 256, and that was near the end of the war. But in most cases, the rosters has it about 300. The highest was 306, and that was its initial inceptions. They are here by March of 42. They're not called the 240th until February of 43, and then they're disbanded in the first week of May in 1945.
Are you aware that the beds that the MPs used at the Vanderbilt estate or the coach house are still upstairs there?
I've not been upstairs at the Vanderbilt Mansion in a long time, on the 3rd floor. I know there's a lot of beds there when I was there last year, but they've moved just about everything that was in that building due to the construction. But I know any of the original beds we still have. It's also interesting because at Vanderbilt Mansion, the Secret Service was also there until 1943. Until the second superintendent realized that too much hanky-panky was going on in the Vanderbilt mansion by the Secret Service. Apparently nothing's changed here in 2018, and they were sent down to Poughkeepsie. I was not aware of any 240th military police in the actual Vanderbilt mansion itself, but I knew that the coach house is where many of the officers were staying.
William Hassett was the correspondence secretary for FDR. They were great friends. William Hassett and FDR were about the same age, and he wrote a book called Off the Record. I believe Patsy still has a copy. I have a copy, and it's just tremendous stuff about FDR and his relationship with other people here in Hyde Park. And the one story that, who was the head of the Secret Service? Mike
Riley.
Mike Riley.
Yep.
He went with Roosevelt to the Casablanca conference. I think that was in 1942, after Pearl Harbor, of course. And Charles de Gaulle, General de Gaulle, was upset that he wasn't in on a lot of the high-level political meetings that were going on at Casablanca. So he asked for a private meeting with FDR. And FDR and Charles de Gaulle were actually about the same height. We keep thinking of FDR seated at his desk or something. He was, I think, 6'3",
6'2".
6'2", and Charles de Gaulle was tall also. And during the Mike Riley hid behind a curtain while Roosevelt and de Gaulle were having a discussion. It got very heated, and de Gaulle had a huge nose, of course, and Roosevelt had a huge chin, right? And they're right in each other's face, fit together kind of good. And Mike Riley, he couldn't believe the heavy-duty discussion they were having, screaming at each other. Mike Riley's behind the curtain, and he puts his hand on the pistol. And he was going to shoot de Gaulle if de Gaulle took a swing at FDR. And can you imagine what history would have been like if the president's bodyguard bumped off Charles de Gaulle? And Mike Riley never told Roosevelt or de Gaulle that he had his hand on his pistol. And Roosevelt had died, and Mike Riley wrote a tell-all book.
Yeah.
It was very interesting.
Yeah, it is interesting.
But there were a lot of things like that. If you start digging, you're going to find out these stories. But the best that I ran across was William Hassett. The books that were written by Roosevelt's relatives, they all made themselves look like heroes. The children or whoever was writing the book, you were the hero of the book, and not Roosevelt. So I thought I got a more honest story from the people that were employees that didn't have any extra grind, really. Some maid at the White House. Did you know that Roosevelt had the reputation of being a pincher? He was in his wheelchair. He's just the right height. Some maid would walk by, and he'd reach out and pinch their butt. That was his recreation, I guess. But this came from a maid that wrote stories about Roosevelt. Okay, we got a question over here.
Did you say it took several years to be known as the 240?
About a year. When they were created, it had to go through Congress and through the Army. It was a special unit. So they weren't officially known the 240th Military Police until March of 43, but the unit itself has been here since February of 42. Same unit, same commanders, different name, but all part of the Army. Yes.
They were originally the 508th Military Police Battalion, and they marched in New York City on Fifth Avenue, right in front of the Museum of, the Metropolitan Museum. We have a picture of them in the book. And they came to Hyde Park just almost like on a demonstration basis, and that was really the genesis of this whole group of 300. I think a lot of those 508s came here also, so joined the 240th. One more question? Maybe we'll have more than one.
Okay, I was wondering, how did they communicate? What means of communication did they use, and did they communicate just within Hyde Park, or did they communicate locally, nationally, internationally?
Well, there are two forms of communication going on the Hyde Park property. The Secret Service are communicating nationwide, mostly though with Washington. There were wires that were connected to the phone line in the house at Hyde Park, checked on the hour all the way to Washington. So that's what the Secret Service is doing. The 240th, strictly on the 1,600 acres. They are field telephones. There is a central intelligence that was set up for the commanders here in Hyde Park. But the communication was mainly to guard the 1,600 acres. So we have some of those field telephones that we set up. They're roll wires that we set up to simple poles. They went about 20 feet tall around the property. There were 30 different communication checkpoints that were on the property, including behind the house, the road that comes up from the railroad. There was a road that came up. That is the first big checkpoint. There are a laser checkpoint that was there at the time. We just put up the new back there this past fall, a brand new little house that the men stayed in. So the communication was strictly within the Hyde Park, but mostly within the property itself. So when I say 600 acres, it is 600 acres, but they're also doing a mile radius around the entire property as well, right down to the river. So for the 240th, strictly on the property, Secret Service, we're going national with their communication.
Those guard shacks were about the size of an outhouse.
Yep.
And you have one of them, you said?
Yeah, we just recreated one down on the road that's heading down to the railroads behind the house.
I've heard from some people that the wiring that was all underground, people that live on places around the perimeter, sometimes they dig up that wire and they just don't understand what it was. It is kind of a fun treasure to find. You had a question?
I just wanted to ask so they had like sentry booths stationed around.
They did, and then they also utilized at the Roosevelt some of the gatehouses that are right on Route 9 as well. Sometimes the 240th were there when FDR was in Hyde Park, and then other times the state troopers would man that when FDR was not in Hyde Park.
So what's the distance between the checkpoints?
Well, again, there are 30 different checkpoints that are between the river and Top Cottage. So you're talking, as depending where you are. Now, there are 5 different checkpoints right on the immediate realm of Springwood. And then it gets a little bit more. There are 5 right around Valkill, and then they're scattered on the northwest around the property. There was no central. You could move these communication points. The radios were picked up. We moved them, and then you put them either underground or you put them into poles, depending on what Roosevelt was doing that particular day. So they were mobile, and that's what we do during the event is we move them around.
That was modern technology back then, too. Everyone was amazed at the Now, we have in the museum, and there's also a copy over on the table of a map showing all of those...
Yeah.
What do they call them?
They were communication centers.
Yeah. All right. Guard posts,
Yeah.
guard shacks.
Yep.
We have a gentleman here at our meeting who knew some of the MPs. He's sitting back here hiding. Smitty, would you please stand up and take the microphone?
Actually, I didn't notice until just now because he's sitting behind Ralph Osterhout, and you know how big Ralph Osterhout is. You might know Smitty from Malloy's Pharmacy.
More from Chris Bell Hardware, I think. Sure. What questions would you like to?
You have to hold it right up to your mouth.
Yeah, okay. Now,
Any questions for Smitty?
we have any questions? Well, no real story, but I'll tell you one that I when I was a kid delivering newspapers. When I was a kid delivering newspapers, I lived in Statsburg. My whole family did there, all 13 of us. But I remember when Tommy Steenson, if anybody knew Tommy Steenson, he was in the Air Force, and he was going overseas, so he came over Statsburg with a plane that he was going overseas in. And I happened to be down by the firehouse and delivering papers, and I seen him come over, and that was a pretty good sized plane he had. It was a bomber, and he went down toward the school, real low over the trees, like he was coming in to bomb the school. And I can remember that today. Whoever was on the airplane watch up on the hill there turned in a red flash, I think. And I don't know what happened, but he probably got combed over for it, that's for sure. But I always remember that. And yeah, Ray. Lord, I know Ray. I know he must have been one of the MPs or guards down at Roosevelt, and he married Ellie up here in Hyde Park. I'm trying to think of her last name. And pardon? Horrocks. Because I remember Percy Horrocks. It was her father, and Ray was a real nice guy. He was a guard down there, and my brother, my oldest brother, was worked on the Roosevelt estate for the president's mother, and after the war, during the war, after he joined the Park Service, after they took over for that. I'm sorry, I'm getting away from the phone here. But anyway, he worked for Roosevelt's mother. And, of course, I'm trying to think of Mr. Plow. He was a gardener there. I remember him because I worked for the Park Service back in the 50s. I was a guard down at Roosevelt. And we had one of their guard shacks right next to the burial there, and we used to pull guard there, and then of course walk around for the punches. And up in Vanderbilt's, we used to pull guard up there too. And I remember all the stories of the Civil Service, Secret Service. I saw living up in the third floor, and I still can't get it.
So, well, you were a soldier, and you had some duty guarding the grave for FTF?
Not at all. When I worked for the Park Service, that was one of our guard posts. We worked in the library, guarding the library, and then we would guard there, and then we guard in Vanderbilt's, and shifted around. That was in the 50s, 1950, 50. Pardon? No, I was not.
Yeah, Patsy just wanted to make sure that we understood he wasn't one of the 240th MPs. But thank you. It's very good to... Any other questions? I think we've had our allotted time, so one thing I want to change the... Oh, question, sorry.
I was just wondering how frequently FDR came to Hyde Park during the war years. And also, his schedule probably was not publicized, so he was here secretively.
Well, actually, he's in Hyde Park over 200 times as President of the United States. Now, when it comes to the war, it's a little bit more detailed. Mike Riley actually details it very well. We know every time that FDR comes to Hyde Park as President of the United States. I think he's here more than the allotted. We know that he comes here secretly as well, but we do know every move when he comes to Hyde Park as president. It's interesting because I did it a couple years ago. I wanted to find the same amount as governor of New York, how many times he came home to Hyde Park. And the records are pretty much gone, and the state police will not tell me when he came. I don't know what the secret is. He's been dead since 1945. He does not plan on coming back. Yeah, we do know exactly how many times he came home to Hyde Park as President of the United States. So, yeah, we do have that. And
Read that all on the FDR presidential website. They have, if you go under the link that says FDR day by day, his whole calendar,
Yeah.
where he's going and who he's entertaining, is all digitized on the presidential website.
yeah, each day is chronicled. We know how many times he went to Top Cottage. We know how many times he went down to Warm Springs as President of the United States. It was very, very detailed.
Did the 240 do their same jobs when he wasn't in Hyde Park?
No, that's when you did some drilling up at Rogers. That's you could relax a little bit. That's when the basketball games and baseball games happened. Those games did not happen when FDR was in Hyde Park. So they did have some downtime, which is much different if you were serving overseas because there is really no downtime. But here, when FDR is not here, and he's here anywhere from 1 day to 3 weeks when he comes home. So it could be very tenseful for 3 weeks, and then you could have a month where he's not around. But keep in mind that they were not just guarding the president. They are guarding the property that any time, any Roosevelt was in Hyde Park. So Mom is in Hyde Park till September of 1941. And then the kids, when they're not in the war. But more importantly, Eleanor is back in town all the time as well, whether Franklin is here or not. So when any Roosevelt showed up in Hyde Park, this 240 went on alert, as did the Secret Service. So,
Winston Churchill visited Hyde Park 4 times, and he was part of these escape excursions that Roosevelt would have. He pretty much was scared to death by Roosevelt's driving with a hand-operated car.
To give you a sense of how much the Secret Service were irritated with Roosevelt, a couple years ago I had a gentleman that was on my tour, and I talked about how Roosevelt would love to lose the Secret Service. He prided it as he drove around the property. And this gentleman goes, "My family doesn't talk about that." I go, "What do you mean?" He goes, "My father was part of the Secret Service, and he drove the Secret Service nuts. That more than 90% of the time, if Roosevelt wanted to lose them on the property, he did." Now, I don't know what that says about the Secret Service, but what it did show you is that Roosevelt knew the property extremely well. He was very private. He understood what the protection meant. Eleanor did not like it either. Mike Riley talks about it in his book, that after a while, Eleanor's Secret Service detail dressed in common clothes in the audience. She knew they were there, but she did not see them. They understood what it was that they needed the protection, but it really did infringe on what was really a private family here in Hyde Park.
Okay. I wanted to say the 50-50, that it's traditional to have a 50-50 at the Historical Society meetings. This time, the half of the 50-50, the winner's going to get half, and we're going to give to the 240th reenactors the club half of the 50-50. So, should I? if anybody wants to, last chance. Okay. I guess we're still counting. Is that correct? Yeah. Should we do it after and just tell them? Okay, while they're counting, if anybody's got a last minute question.
All of these people, when the telephone rang, they had to have a code name. They couldn't say, this is Joe Schmidt from the MPs, I want to talk to so-and-so. They would have, all of them would have code names, such as Moses Smith. That was one of the code names of, they were Hyde Park people that FDR knew, that he would give them code names.
What Patsy's talking about is the communication between FDR and the, I guess, wireless, people in Europe, say Winston Churchill. They were confusing the enemy because some general would have Moses Smith's name, but they know who it was over there. Ralph, you had a question, right?
When I was in school, I used to man one of those observation booths up in Statsburg, and there was a phone there. We just picked the phone up, and I think there was about the MP there. There was the one that answered that phone. Was that correct?
Yes, it was. Yeah.
Our job was to just watch anything that moved over the river.
And that would actually be going to the
Yeah.
communication.
Okay.
Really on the Rogers estate that would then detail anything that needed to go up there. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we used to man that 24 hours a day. Like the high school girls used to go up there during the daytime, and the guys would go up there at night. I'd go up there with a bicycle from the South Cross Road from 8 to 12. But that's who answered the phone when we picked it up and said, okay, I was wondering about that. And I found out after 74 years.
And the Roosevelt people would, at the Cromwell mansion, would eventually call Stewart Air Force Base in Newburgh. And the observation post that Ralph was at was on Mount Moriah, just east of the village of Statsburg. It's about where that deli is now, only in the back there. There was another observation post in East Park. We have the former town historian. There is a historic marker there. It's on the Rhinebeck Bank property, but it was really across the road about where the cabins are now. And we had quite a celebration when we put the historic post in there. Okay, I guess we're ready for the 50-50. The last three numbers, I don't have my glasses.
064. Last three numbers, 064.
Okay, she won 52, and we are donating 53. Thank you so much.
Okay, let's break for refreshments. I don't quite know how long that'll be, and then we'll have a business meeting after that. Now, Julia Elquist is here. She's our membership person, and if you want to join our historical society, It's $15 a year, and I think most people can afford that, or $25 a year for your family. All right? Well,